Can everybody hear me okay? All right. If I talk too loud, let me know. So this is a 45-minute class. We're going to be talking about native pollinators. It's part of the Integrated Pest Management Program with the Master Gardeners. I'm going to be focusing on primarily attracting native bees and how to create habitats for them in your garden. We're going to be talking about mason bees, carpenter bees, leafcutter bees, bumblebees, sunflower bees, and squash bees. Okay? We're not going to be talking about honeybees per se, because everything that we're going to be discussing in this class will benefit honeybees, but we could do an entire day training just on building and maintaining beehives for European honeybees. I'm focusing primarily on native bee populations, in large part because we're growing a lot of summer vegetables this time of year. Things like tomatoes, corn, beans, squashes, and all of those are native to the Americas, and they have evolved to be pollinated in part by native pollinators. European honeybees didn't really show up until about the 1600s, so I have nothing against them. So we're just going to be talking about them primarily on the natives. A couple statistics. In general, you're looking at about $20 to $40 billion worth of money that's coming out of crops that are pollinated. In general, both natives and European honeybees, about 15% of that is done by native bees. So that's a really important part of our agriculture here. And then you've also heard that statistic about 1 out of 4 mouthfuls is from a pollinator. I've pulled off where is that? Just really quickly, Farmer Fred posted this on his website, but this is a report that's put out every week by the USDA, and this is from Monday the 13th, and these were all the things that were being either grown or that were being reported on around this area. So we're looking at wheat, oats, rice, cotton, alfalfa, kiwi, pomegranates, grapes, strawberries, apples, apricots, olives, citrus, which we have a row right here, almonds, walnuts, pistachios, snap peas, onions, carrots, tomatoes, asparagus, bell peppers, pumpkins, watermelon, cantaloupe, squash, fava beans, radishes. These are all things that are actually being done sort of right now in the Sacramento area. So this is really important in terms of pollination for plants. In general, the problem that pollinators are having right now is there's 4 main stresses on the pollinator population, and that doesn't just include bees. It also includes things like moths, butterflies, beetles, flies, and other things that also assist. But all of them are coming basically under 4 main stresses. The first one is just outright loss of habitat, and that's things like development. The second one is degradation of habitat, and under that you can sometimes put monoculture when you don't have a diversity of crops or plants to sustain a viable pollinating population. The third one is pesticide use. And I always like to remind people at this point that contrary to what the public thinks, the majority of pesticide abuse, I should say, is done by the average homeowner. If farmers didn't have to use pesticides, they wouldn't. They have a thin enough margin as is, and pesticides are very expensive, but they have to be applied by trained personnel. They have to keep very close records. And we'll sort of talk about that. And then the fourth one are mites and parasites. And you've probably all heard about colony collapse disorder. That's been in the news a lot recently. They're still trying to pinpoint what the exact cause of that is, but they're thinking it's going to be probably a combination of all 4 of those things, just putting too much stress on the pollinator population. So just a really quick topic on pesticides. There's also a corresponding talk going on down the hill, and that one starts at 10. So when you're done here, you're more than welcome to go down there and hear what they're going to be talking about with integrated pest management and pesticides as well. But I brought these pesticides here in part because these are the most common ones that we sell at the nursery, And these, I also thought it was important to talk about them because all of these are quote-unquote listed as organic certified or OMRI certified for organic gardening. And I always try to remind people, so we'll sort of start with, let's say, this product, which is the pyrethrins. When these first came out, everybody thought they were great because they were based on chrysanthemums. They were seen as being natural and organic. But this is what's referred to as a non-selective broad-spectrum pesticide, meaning basically whatever you hit, you will take out. Now that's great if you've got ants or a spider in the house, but if you use this out in the garden and you don't use it judiciously, you could take out quite a few pollinators.
What is it?
Okay. This is the pyrethrins.
Is it a substitute pyrethrum, not the original one? Pyrethroids.
Yeah, it's all in the same grouping, but this is more of the original. It's not the chemically based one, and because of that, again, it's a little bit misleading because people think this is because it's organic that they can just go crazy with it, and this is something that you still want to use judiciously. The other one here is spinosad or spinosad. This is another one that's used a lot. It's also OMRI certified. Great for taking out caterpillars, geranium budworm, petunia worms, tomato hornworms. It takes care of flea beetles, a lot of chewing insects. But again, if you open up the booklet on the back, it will state that you're going to want to try to use this in areas where they're not visible pollinating populations, at least for a couple hours. So it's really always important that you open that booklet and read the back because it's there for a purpose. And again, these are both listed as OMRI certified, as well as something like neem oil, which is derived from the neem tree. Okay, great product. It sometimes has a brand name of Rose Defense, where it's treated as a fungicide, miticide, and a pesticide, derived from the neem tree, again, but same sort of qualification on the back to be careful to use it where you've got visible pollinating populations. So, again, use it judiciously. This is a class of pesticides that you probably are hearing a lot about in the news. This is imidacloprid. These are what are referred to as neonicotinoids. They've been in the news a lot lately. Maybe not on the front page, but there's a lot of discussion going on about these. If you do a Google search, you'll find a really good article in Wikipedia. And then beneath that is a similar article about its potential effect on pollinating populations. It is off patent now. It used to be originally produced by Bayer, so it's produced by a number of different companies now. It might have a brand name like something like Merit or something like that. But you'll often see way down here, way down here at the bottom, listed as one of the ingredients, imidacloprid. This is a systemic. So basically you treat the entire plant at the base. The tree pulls it up through the xylem, which is the water-carrying tissues of the plants. Whatever's feeding on that ingests these pesticides and it kills them. So it basically comes in three forms. This is what's called a 2-in-1. So it both treats insects and feeds your roses. This is referred to as a 3-in-1. So it treats for insects, treats for diseases, and feeds your roses. And then this is just called a straight-out systemic. These you would use about every 6 weeks. These you would use about once a year. And this is usually sold for people that are having insect problems on their trees. At the end of the summer when you get those big sticky honeydew rings on crepe myrtles and birches and things like that, when you have aphids and whitefly, most people will use this. And certain tree companies will actually inject it into a tree for you if you'd like. The big debate in the gardening or insect community right now is what effect this has on pollinators. Because the tree does pull up the entire chemical. The chemical does go into the pollen and the nectar. The manufacturer admits that, but they say that there's trace amounts that do not cause problems for pollinators. There's a big debate about this. So I always say do your research, draw your own conclusion. There are a few countries in the EU that are beginning to ban this in certain applications. Quite a bit of research is still going on about this. And this is sometimes tied to the colony collapse disorder because when they are testing both the pollen and the nectar, they are finding a number of herbicides and pesticides, including this one, in the hives. But they're still doing research. Any questions on these? Chemicals in general. Okay. So just a really quick botany class. Here's your flower. There's your female part, basically, and there's your male parts. I'm not going to go through all the different names because even I still get them all mixed up. Basically, it has to get the pollen to the female part down to the ovary to produce a seed. This is often referred to as a complete flower because it has both male and female parts in it. A good example of this in the vegetable garden would be tomatoes and peppers. Okay? Often you'll have female flowers on a separate plant, male flowers on another plant, and that's often referred to as dioecious plants, meaning two houses, because they're sort of two separate houses. And a good example of those for edibles would be something like ginkgos, where we get ginkgo nuts from, hops, and pistachios. So that's where you have two different genders on two different trees. Often then as well, you'll have male and female flowers on the same plant, but separated. And a perfect example of that would be squashes, where you have male and female plants on the same plant that have to be pollinated. And that is an interesting thing. When your squashes and watermelons and things, cucumbers are first starting and they first begin to flower, in general those plants put their male flowers out first. And if there are no female flowers present, they tend to drop off. So we get a lot of people that come into the nursery saying, what's going on with my plants? They're dropping, squash plants, they're dropping all the flowers. That's often why, especially if it's early in the season. Okay. So let's talk about the different types of bees. So one of the best bees is... But we'll go through the honeybee first. I mean, everybody's familiar with honeybee. And again, we're not going to talk about them too much, but these are the ones that most people are most familiar with. The next one is going to be mason bees. Mason bees are very similar to carpenter bees in appearance. This is sort of what they will look like. They're often referred to as orchard bees or blue orchard bees as well, because the mason bees are active primarily in the spring, and they're often used to help fruit tree growers pollinate their trees. And if you go down to the orchard and look against the side of this tool shed, you'll see...
Hand that around, will you? The mason bees?
Oh, well, this is the carpenter bee one, but I'll pass it around. When I finish with these, I'll pass these around. You'll see we've got a bee house against the side of the tool shed, and then these are also some bee houses, and we'll talk about these a little bit later. But they're very popular with orchard growers. They have been slightly domesticated because they can use them in their orchards. They're attracted to early blooming trees as well as berry crops, so they're also very good for blueberries and cranberries and things like that. They're referred to as a tunnel dweller, so they don't actually create a hive. They're not considered social bees, where you'll find hundreds or thousands of them together in one hive. They're solitary bees, and you can see, and again we'll go into a little bit more detail, it's basically one queen laying her eggs in these tunnels. Okay. And you usually get about one life cycle per season. There's about 27 species of mason bees. And then the next one is the carpenter bees. And this is, again, and I'll pass this around. These are the carpenter bees. These are the ones that you'll often be familiar with digging into wood, old wood especially. There's basically a large carpenter bee and a small carpenter bee. The large carpenter bees are the ones that do the chewing and the drilling. The small carpenter bees don't have the mouth parts for doing that, so they're often looking for empty tubes or empty stalks. They can chew through the pithy part of a stalk, but they cannot chew through wood. Okay, and so they're usually attracted to very large, open-faced flowers. And then the small carpenter bees are attracted to a wide variety of flowers. And sometimes you'll have a generational overlap, but again, these are the ones, and you'll see these out now. And we'll talk about the same way that the mason bees will use houses like this, so will the carpenter bees. If you want to pass that around. And then after that, you'll have something like a leafcutter bee. And the leafcutter bees, to me, look very similar to the carpenter bees. You know, this is the best picture that I could find of them. But to me, I really can't tell the difference when I'm looking at bees between most of them, like a leafcutter or a carpenter, depending on the time of year. And the leafcutter bees, this is a common one where customers will come into the nursery with a leaf that has almost like a perfectly circular punch out, like you've used one of those paper cutouts, or sometimes it's a half circle, and they use those to line their nest. And they're also a tunnel nester, though a few of them do deposit their eggs in the ground. Okay, and they're primarily attracted to regular size flowers as well as things in the aster family and the pea family. And then there's also an alfalfa leafcutter bee that's actually used for alfalfa growers. And they actually will create blocks for them to pollinate alfalfa. And that's a very good bee as well. And so what'll happen with these tubes, if you looked at it from the side, they would basically put in, it's called sort of like bee bread, where they take the pollen and they sort of mash it together. They would put it at the end of the tube, they would lay an egg, and then they would seal that off with one of those perfectly round flower petals. And they're actually very interesting designers because they'll cut ovals for the sides and then they'll cap it with a one round petal. So you'll often see the damage on rose petals and bougainvilleas. They like sort of soft tissue, but don't panic about it. It's just something, they're very important pollinators, and they're just building their nests. And then they'll just do basically egg and then seal it off, egg and then seal it off, all the way until they actually seal off the end of the tunnel.
Can I ask a question?
Sure.
Can you get multiple different types of, whether it be the carpenter, the leaf cutter, or the mason, different bees? If you were to make one of those houses and put it up, could you get multiple kinds of bees?
Yeah,
in
and
one
that's
house?
a good question. Everybody hear the question? The question was, can you get multiple types of bees just from one house? And you can. I'm not sure if you can actually see it from far away, but this actually has a couple different sizes of holes. So different bees will use different types of holes. And most of them are what I refer to as tunnel dwellers, so they will be attracted to something like this. So mason bees, leafcutter bees, and carpenter bees all will use a similar type structure. Then after leafcutter bees, we come across my favorite, which are bumblebees, and you know that's the typical bee that you see this time of year. Where's my picture? You know, bumblebees are the really large bumblebees. These are like the B-52 in of the bee world. These guys carry so much pollen, it's amazing. They can often travel for miles. There's probably about 50 species of bumblebees, and they are just as threatened as the European honeybee. Their habitats in general are always disappearing. They're undergoing just as much stress as any other bee. What I like about bumblebees is they're one of the first bees to come out in the early spring and one of the last bees to disappear in the fall. Okay, they have a broad range of flowers and vegetables that they like, and they actually have very long tongues.
Is there anything we can do? Would they appreciate a bee house as well?
No, because they're actually soil dwellers.
Yeah.
So we'll talk about that. But they're actually soil dwellers, and they're considered somewhat social because they'll often form what's called a colony. They don't have a hive, but they'll often repurpose rodent holes to build an actual colony. And then you'll often have an overlap of generations with a queen and her daughters coexisting in the same colony at the same time.
So is their habitat as threatened as the honeybee?
Yes, and basically all pollinators are, but the bumblebee seems to be having the same problems as the European honeybee. And what they think, though they have no proof, bumblebees are used domestically in greenhouses to help pollinate tomatoes. And what they think has happened is that when they were imported to Europe for that domestication process, that somehow they were brought back with a series of perhaps mites or pesticides or illnesses that then spread into the native population. But that's what they think has happened. There's no absolute proof on that.
Do all these bees have the potential to sting for people that are allergic to honeybee stings?
Not as much. Most of the non-social bees, because they're rarely protecting a nest like a hive does, where you might have a drone whose sole protection is or sole purpose is protection, they'll rarely sting unless
But they can sting if you were to try to grab one or mess with it.
if you would try to grab one and mess with it, certainly.
They all have stingers.
Yeah, but I use myself as an example. I've been working around, I don't know, the last 15 years, and I have not been stung once except by a wasp. And that's because I was trying to get rid of its nest right above me at the time. And I like wasps, but yeah, I have issues with them. But I've never been stung by a bee. I just can't remember. You know, honeybees.
Wasps pollinate, right?
They also pollinate as well. Yeah. And honeybees, their stinger will be pulled out and they will die. Most of the other bees do not have removable stingers.
Oh, really?
They can sting multiple times, but the stings are to me, very slight. Almost like a mosquito bite.
You might feel differently if you were allergic to them.
That is very true. That is very true. So getting back to the bumblebees, what I like about them is they can also regulate their temperatures. They can actually get up to about 100 degrees, getting warm in the sun. They have a really interesting apparatus where they'll actually detach their wings from their flight mechanism, and they do this thing called sonication, which is basically they vibrate in the flowers to release the pollen. And that's really important for a lot of the vegetables and crops that are native to the Americas. So tomatoes, squash, blueberries, things like that. And often what they recommend if you're having a problem with your pollination of tomatoes and you don't think you have enough bees is to go out with an electric toothbrush and actually put the toothbrush in the flowers. And that's that same sort of vibration that releases the pollen. And the bees intentionally do that, like I said, by disengaging their wings. And if anybody here is good at music, they supposedly vibrate at a middle C. And like I said, they're soil dwelling, and they build colonies, and they actually will build these very interesting sort of bowl type structures that include both the eggs and the pollen. And their sort of nesting setup looks like a good example might be a softball with a little Vienna sausage on the top. And that's basically their setup. A big ball of pollen with a little egg on the top. And we'll sort of touch into that a little bit later about the importance of, if you're going to be doing a bee house or some sort of structure, it needs to be secure. That's sort of the number one thing. You don't want something swaying in a tree, because that movement can just knock the larva off that pollen, and then it has a very low chance of survival. And we'll talk about just mounting these securely. And then after the bumblebees, there's also what's called a sunflower bee, and that to me they look very similar to honeybees. And there are probably about 15 species of those. Most of them are attracted to sunflowers specifically, and some of them are only drawn to certain types of flowering cactus. And again, ground nesting, slightly communal in their life habits. And then the other one after that, to me the most important one, are the squash bees. And these are native to the Americas. There's about 13 species, and they're only limited to the Americas. And it's been very interesting because they've been able to track their I guess you could say their migration as we have moved squashes and cucumbers and watermelons around the country. You'll be able to find these bees. And initially they were only native to the Southwest and Mexico, down into Central America. Now you can find these from Georgia up to Maine, all the way up to Canada. Okay. And the interesting thing about these is they're specifically tied to squash plants. The female will only feed her larva squash pollen, and the male and the female actually mate in the squash flowers. And often if you go out in the morning, if you're lucky, the males actually spend the night in squash flowers.
Would that include zucchini and crooked-neck?
Yes.
Okay.
Any of the cucurbits. So the zucchinis, the squashes, the cucumbers, the watermelons, the melons, I might be forgetting something, but everything in that family. And the interesting thing about them is they're also soil dwelling, but they'll actually often build nests right at the base of the squash plants. So keep an eye out for them. See if you can find them.
What is that little bee that comes around? It's in the Sierras. We always used to call it a meat bee or something like that.
Might be a sweat bee, maybe?
Yeah, I mean, you have a picnic up in the Sierras, they're there, right?
Yeah.
Just call those yellow jackets.
No,
The yellow jackets, well, to me, they're a noticeable wasp looking.
Yeah.
There's a very, very small bee, and actually it often likes the plants like alyssum.
Yes.
And we were just noticing some at the nursery the other day. They're often a very small and a metallic green, and those are referred to as sweat bees. And most people, unfortunately, their experience with them is getting sort of bitten or stung because they get in your clothes because they're trying to get into your sweat. And then they get trapped, and then people hit them, and then that's when they get sort of stung. But they're actually also very good pollinators, and they're ground nesting. And unlike the bumblebees that can travel for miles, they only travel a few hundred feet from where they're born. So it's one of those ones. If you sort of stand still and look at something really closely, you'd be surprised how many of those sweat bees are around.
We have a bunch of them on our list. I was going to ask, because they're tiny. They look like a miniature bee.
They do, yeah.
But, yeah.
And sometimes they're brownish gray, and sometimes they're this really vibrant, green like the top of this book. And so let's see, with the squash bees, and they're ground nesting, and like I said, they'll go all the way up to Canada in terms of habitation. So then these are the houses. I just brought some examples. There's lots of houses that you can buy online. They usually will have different size holes. The main criteria, if you are looking for a bee house or what's called a bee block, is I would prefer that it be 5 to 6 inches deep. Okay, and the reason why I would prefer that is when most of these bees lay their eggs, they lay their females in the back and the males in the front. So the males hatch first so that they can forage and build up their strength when it's time to mate when the females come out. If the tunnels are too shallow, what ends up happening is they won't lay females, they'll just lay males. And so you'll have a preponderance of males over females. So if you can, try to get something that's at least 5 to 6 inches deep. That's the preference for most of these tunneling bees.
Okay, so then that one there would not be deep enough?
This one to me wouldn't be deep enough, but I wouldn't turn this down. I would still put this out in my garden because there might be other bees that would maybe use it, and you still might get some females. But in a perfect world, you'd want it at least 5 to 6 inches deep.
And there's no reason why you couldn't make your own, is there? I mean,
No.
You've got drill bits and stuff. It looks like that's pretty easy to make.
Speaking of making your own,
it is.
this is my caveman version of a bee house. I made this actually last night in about half an hour, and you can tell. But this is actually a repurposed Christmas tree stump. So I'm really big on recycling. And this one is about 5 inches deep. So, and again, I just did 2 different type holes. These are the drill bits I used. One's a 3/8 and one's a 3/16. And I just mark it with painter's tape where the 6-inch mark is, so I know how deep to go. And I just did basically 2 different types of holes.
The previous one that you showed us has some little tiny holes in there. Mm-hmm. What would those be for?
Maybe some of the sweat bees, maybe some of the different wasps. You know, hard to say. But there's quite a few things that would probably use this, and it would be great. Now, the debate that we were having earlier with some of the other Master Gardeners is these are theoretically one-time use projects because they are not, in a sense, reusable in the same way that something like this, which is an amazing piece of construction. Elizabeth Wise is a Master Gardener, and her husband Michael made this. Puts mine to shame. But this is a good example of having removable trays that you can take out and clean. Okay. And so this one, in a sense, would have more multiple uses than this one. But again, I would still use this. And you could take this concept of holes in dead wood and extrapolate it to anywhere on your property. If you had, let's say, a log laying in the back somewhere, you could do the same principle. So don't just think that it has to be some sort of freestanding built house like this. The bees will repurpose beetle holes and things like that. They're looking for dead trees, dead branches. things like that.
To clean those out, when would you? What time of the
In the
year?
fall.
In the fall, you
In the
would
fall.
clean them out, and you wouldn't do any damage to anybody.
You shouldn't do any damage. Yeah, yeah.
So when you were saying it's one use though, can you just clean it out by re-drilling the hole?
You could, yeah. And then also too, you know, if you go online, and we'll talk about a couple of resources in a bit, they will actually sell these paper straws. And so what you would do is you would drill a slightly larger diameter hole, you would insert the paper straw, then at the end of the season you could pull that straw out and discard it and put it in a clean straw. And the logic behind that is you are then cutting down on the potential for mites and other predators that might be reusing those holes for their own purpose. Any questions on the bee houses? And then getting back to, like I said earlier, you know, you would want to mount this securely. You don't want this moving in the wind. You don't want this, in a sense, vibrating in any way.
You think you're supposed to face them south? Is that
Face them south, yes, so they warm quickly, yeah. Very good point. And then we talked about the soil-dwelling bees. The interesting thing about creating a habitat for the soil-dwelling bees is it's very, very easy. You just need to find a patch of soil on your property that basically has no purpose to you. It's really good if it's very sandy, if it's very gravelly, if it's very clayey, that sort of maybe, you know, seizes up in the summer when it dries out. The worse the soil for you, the better for the bees that need soil to build their nests, because they're very easy to excavate. You don't want to cover it with mulch. Ideally, you don't want to use any herbicides around it, any pesticides. It doesn't have to be that big, but look around your property. You know, I'm a perfect example. I'm always trying to cover things with mulch. You know, cut down on weeds, help with the watering, that sort of thing. But I have an area behind my garbage cans. It's about 3 feet wide and 8 feet long, and I just keep that clear. It's just this awful hard clay soil, but the soil nesting bees really like it because they can dig right into it and create a colony or a nest that doesn't collapse. It's that simple. Any questions on that? Great. So we'll go over to the plants really quickly. We've got about 15 minutes, so I want to get this done. And so have any questions? Bees see in ultraviolet. So they prefer things in the blue. So blues, violets, lavender. That they also like white, and they also like yellow. But continuing with the thing of integrated pest management, don't be afraid to use other colors, oranges, reds, things like that, because bees still will be attracted to them, as well as other pollinators. And I brought a whole series of different types of plants that attract pollinators, and I brought, like, to me, alyssum is one of the easiest. It's an annual. You can plant this around your vegetable beds. It won't interfere with your work. It self-seeds. A lot of different pollinators like it. This is globe amaranth, another annual. Really popular with pollinators and bees. Because it's this time of year that we're focusing on summer vegetables, that's why I brought things that are flowering right now. Okay, this is, I always tell people, don't forget to look up. So these are actual trees that are flowering right now. These aren't spring flowering trees. These are what I call late spring, early summer. So this is a toyon. This is a California native, Christmas berry. They're blooming. The ones that we have in the demo bed at the nursery are blooming, and the bees are all over it. So this is a large shrub. Can get up to maybe 10 feet tall. Hello. This is a pineapple guava. Usually it's a shrub. Sometimes it's used as a hedge. But if you go down to the well garden, they actually have this as a tree, growing as a tree. And again, great colors for pollinators. Hey, I'm working here. This one, I don't know if you're familiar with this. This is a Chitalpa. These are blooming right now. Really beautiful tree. Low water usage. Taller, probably 20 to 30 feet tall eventually. Great flowers that the bees like. It looks like somewhat like a foxglove or an orchid. And then this is one of my favorite trees that's not used enough, I think, in landscaping. This is a linden. Tilia cordata, little leaf linden. This one's just about to bloom. I have some friends in Gold River that have one of these in their front yard. It's about a 20-foot tree, which is about its mature size. It'll be covered with bees in about 2 weeks. The entire tree just vibrates with so many bees. And it's a very fragrant tree as well. Sometimes it's called a lime tree.
You can actually get those from planting as a house from a Sacramento Tree Foundation.
Yes, you can. A lot of these you can from the Tree Foundation. This guy's hungry. So those are good examples of, you know, not just the shrubs, but the trees. And then I just brought a lot of different, I brought in salvias because, see, it's got a large tube-shaped flower. So obviously not only do the hummingbirds like it, but this is really popular with the large bees because they have long tongues. So they have no problem pulling the nectar. It's really kind of fun to watch carpenter bees because they've learned that they can actually just chew a hole right at the base and pull the nectar out. And on really quiet days, sometimes you can actually hear the pinch. Agastache is another good one. Hummingbird mint. We've got goldenrod, catmint, Shasta daisies. I have quite a few other perennials down here as well. And then don't forget, I have up here, because I like to have multi-purpose plants, don't forget your herbs. A lot of your herbs, if you plant a couple extra and let them flower, they're great for attracting pollinators. If you go down to the herb garden here, you'll see a lot of things in bloom. I wrote down, let's see what's going on. Lavender, thyme, yarrow, santolina, and salad burnet. Those are all flowering right now. Great for attracting pollinators. So I've got thyme. Basil, actually, they've got the African blue basil and the veggie beds here. That's great for attracting other pollinators if you let them flower. Borage, another one, great edible with blue flowers. Salvia, oregano. For whatever reason, bees in my garden love oregano when it's in flower, which will be pretty soon. Pineapple sage, mint, believe it or not, great flowers for attracting bees. This is feverfew in the chrysanthemum family, in the aster family. That great sort of bullseye yellow center with the white petals. And then dill. And if you let these flower, or carrots or parsley, anything in the same family, Queen Anne's lace, great for attracting pollinators. Then in terms of resources, there's a lot of good local resources. I've got a lot of books up here you can come take a look at, but please don't take them because they were loaned to me by other master gardeners and they will track me down. But there's a lot of good things on pollination, conservation, managing the blue orchard mason bees. This is a really good reference that I use a lot, which is put out by the Xerxes Society, which is a non-profit society that's based on raising awareness on insects and pollinators. The UC IPM, the Integrated Pest Management website, is a great resource, as well as the Sacramento County Master Gardener website. There's a great one called pollinator.org that's worldwide, and it's great because you can put in your zip code and it'll actually pull up your specific geographic location and tell you plants that are specific to where you live. And so according to them, we live in California dry steppe. So it's a very interesting website to go to. Don't forget Farmer Fred. He's got some great tips on bees and pollinators. And then downtown is a Sacramento beekeeping store on X Street, and I think it's around like Broadway and 21st. And Peaceful Valley Garden Supply up in Grass Valley, and they have a lot of bee supplies, as well as the bee houses.
You were talking about pollinators. I have a large orange tree that when it goes to blossom, we get thousands of what I believe to be wasps. Is that not also, would that be considered a pollinator also?
Sure. And it depends too on the time of year. You know, in the beginning when the wasp larvae are first hatching, they're usually looking for protein. So they're often looking for caterpillars and things. So you'll often see them flying around geraniums and vegetables, and they're trying to smell leaf damage because they assume if there's leaf damage, there's a caterpillar.
We get them in the lawn. It's like they hover on the lawn. Somebody said that they implant their larvae into some sort of a lawn moth type larva where it incubates.
It
but-
could be, there's parasitic wasps that would
Yeah.
do that, yeah. Yeah, and so in the beginning of the year, they're looking for protein, and then as their larvae mature, then they shift to more of a sugar-based diet, and they are also important pollinators as well. And I have a picture here. This is a good example of it. It looks like a bee, but it's not. This is a syrphid fly, and it's evolved to look like a bee, and it acts like a bee. It's an excellent pollinator. And again, if you didn't know what you were looking at very quickly, it would look like a bee. So there's quite a bit of, I've been told to pass it around.
From the bee houses, do they like a certain distance from the ground, or are they picky about that?
No, they don't seem to be. Any other questions? Well, I think we're done.